Requiem Metal Podcast, Episode 7, Enslaved Part 2. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, Episode 7.
Yeah, 7.
Enslaved Part 2.
Enslaved Part 2. And again, we refrain any, there's no African slavery references.
No.
That's not what this is about. This is actually about a Norwegian Viking metal, well, at least originally Viking metal band known as Enslaved. I'm your host, Jason Hundy.
And I'm Mark Rudolph, and joining us again this week is...
Jeff Kuhn, or Grindcore Kuhn, whatever you want to call me.
Call him Grindcore Kuhn. It makes us happy, at least to know, because we don't have nicknames, at least not yet.
Not good ones, at least.
Yeah. So, and if you're joining us for the first time, or maybe you caught the last segment, this is a podcast devoted kind of academically to talking about some more obscure metal bands from all walks of the world, or all places in the world. And today we're sort of looking at the second half of the career, or thus far of the career, because they're still around today, of a Norwegian band called Enslaved.
And if you're looking for history or like a lot of the backstory, I'd refer you back to the previous episode because we don't want to be too redundant. We got a lot of stuff to try to cover.
Exactly, and there's a lot of really amazing music in sort of the second era of their career. Pretty dynamic stuff, pretty diverse.
Yeah.
So, what would be your kind of characterization of this sort of era of Enslaved?
Oh, just they've kind of moved away from the traditional, Viking metal or,
Black metal,
yeah,
kind
black
of
metal influences, and really took on a lot of prog elements, but still maintained their signature style as far as their guitar and vocals, that kind of thing.
Well, it seems like they've kind of structured the records now instead of just being before. I don't know if it's so much. Every album was kind of you could just listen to certain songs and still get something out of it, but these, especially the last two, Isa and Ruun, they're pretty much, each album is its own record, or its own song, pretty much, if you kind of take them out of context.
Yeah,
it was kind of hard to pick, certain songs to play, so.
And I was commenting to these guys that, and we'll get to Ruun later, but that particular record took a long time to sort of develop, and it almost is like
it's one of those grower records.
Yeah, definitely a grower, and Isa was as well. I think they're almost like headphone records. It's like Enslaved is embracing the 70s sound, and they're almost like requiring you to listen to it in the same way that you would have in the 70s, where you sit down with a whole record. You're not skipping the tracks, and you got the headphones. You just absorb yourself almost into this cosmic, mythological metal universe that Enslaved is sort of creating on these records. And you really started to see the sound develop on the record Marjoram, which was the last record we did on Enslaved Part 1, where they're starting to create more sort of epic songs with these more progressive elements. And by progressive, we want to sort of lay a disclaimer. I mean, it's not Yes or
it's not
Genesis,
Dream Theater.
or Dream Theater or anything like that. It's more some of the elements that you'd see
I'd say almost like how Opeth is become a progressive band, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Or like progressive elements of like Porcupine Tree, more 70s progressive than necessarily like Genesis.
Technical stuff.
Or even, I know when listening to some of the stuff, like even like Atheist or Cynic, you could see some of those influences.
Sure, some of a lot of the stop-start kind of
staccato
weird
drums,
staccato drums, absolutely. And so that's one of the elements that sort of you see running through here, and they're starting to embrace a lot more kind of dynamic keyboards. There's actually a flute player in a couple of the songs on some of these records. They're bringing in additional vocalists to sort of add layers and I mean,
it seems more orchestrated than the last handful of records we talked about last episode.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And it's interesting because Dimmu Borgir, we talked about their style of black metal is more orchestrated in a classical sense. This is much more loosely orchestrated, sort of free improvisational in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's orchestrated in the sense, but everything's kind of it's playing in tandem with one another. Everything's kind of in harmony. It's just to more evoke a feeling than having an orchestra hit here or like some kind of violin jab or something. It's more consistent.
Sure, absolutely, and The first record that I see like a really groundswell of change really happen. I mean, Marjoram sort of was flirting with it, but it still had those sort of breakdowns and blast beats and some of the more traditional elements. Was their last record that they did for Osmos, which was Monumension. And if I'm not mistaken, Monumension came out in 2001, and it even had like multi-part songs like part 1, part 2, which again is a more progressive element, that you see sometimes. But what were your thoughts? This is an album that really connects with you a lot. You were saying,
yeah, I think this one and Mardrum connects. It's the ones I listen to the most. I think it's just because they seem like they're the most developed, the most. I guess they're more listenable, really, to like a naysayer or whatever. Just you could throw this on, and like, okay, I can see where this is going. It's not quite as like in your face, but
sure, yeah.
The songwriting's really stepped up on those 2 records. I think they've kind of finally tried to figure out exactly what to do with all these weird bits.
Yeah,
and they're getting them to kind of be pushed. They're forming into more developed ideas than they were previously, I think.
Yeah. So something that's interesting about this show is when we were talking about like our favorite eras, Jeff, you mentioned sort of the kind of first 3 records as sort of being, for you like a special, memory, and for you, Mark carries sort of the middle period of like, Bloodheim, Mardrum, Monumension, and I guess I'm flying the flag for the last 3 records, I guess the most. So, I guess you get that kind of strange element here. Yeah. The other thing that's unique about this record that I'll just mention real briefly is that they're now fully committed to writing and singing in English, which again is showing them moving away from this sort of Norse Viking kind of culture. It's like Enslaved's grown up on this record. I really feel like
Well, it seems like they understand that you can't be completely underground forever. If you're going to keep doing this, you gotta not make concessions, but you just got to do certain things to get you out, get more exposure.
Possibly just kind of grow. As you grow musically, grow with your ideas and what you do as well.
I can totally see that, thematically on these next couple records where it's all this existential journey kind of stuff.
Sure, absolutely. So. And I see something unique happening in metal, thinking back to this time period of 2001, 2002. This is where, Emperor was putting out Prometheus, and Arcturus was putting out the one record that escapes me. It was the last one with Garm, where they were really sort of...
was this Sham Mirrors?
It was a Sham Mirrors, exactly. Okay. And to me, like those 2 records fit really alongside of this as like almost like the first post black metal records in a way.
It felt like in the early '80s when everybody was being prog, but like it hit that peak.
Sure.
And I think this was kind of that era, and you either fell off or you went crazy into obscurity kind of stuff. So.
Or you continue, like Dimmu Borgir and Cradle were still doing the same thing, And to me, it was like, this is where a lot of bands had to, I think, make a really big choice as to where they were going to go. And Emperor went one direction, technically, and it couldn't take it any further and just basically had to break up. Arcturus almost did the same sort of thing, and Garm left and said, enough with this, we can't do anything more. Yeah. Enslaved, I think, did that, but they opened up the door for so much more experimentation and sort of creativity because there's a freedom in their music. It's very loose and improvisational.
And that's kind of been one of their traits all along, is just wide open spaces in a lot of their tracks.
Absolutely, and as you said, more metaphysical in this era. That's sort of where they're going. So, back to Monumension, we're going to listen to a couple songs to start off with, and then we'll sort of get into another song from it in the next set. But we're going to listen to Convoys to Nothingness and The Voices from Monumension, so enjoy. pair of songs from Monumension, which is sort of a transitional record. It seems like, every record's a transitional record for Enslaved. It's kind of weird that way.
Yeah, this one kind of dictated what they're going to do for the next 3 records post Monumension.
For sure. And one of the elements you're starting to hear, I think, a little bit musically, especially in those 2 songs we heard, was almost this sort of this like Motorhead, Bathory, like older sort of like biker riffing kind of thing,
Power chord riffing, I think.
Yeah. And Jeff, you're sort of one of the musicologists, I guess. I mean, what's sort of changing musically for these guys that you hear those elements so much?
The one thing I did notice, it was that almost like a Motorhead type, or like a Satyricon, or that combined with like a lot of almost psychedelic elements on a lot of what they were doing with their keyboards and their guitar tones. I know in some of the later stuff you'll hear there's almost like a lo-fi, hi-fi type thing with the 2 guitars going on.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Yeah, one guitar is almost kind of entrenched back in that old sound, and the other one's a little bit more spit polish produced.
I know the other thing I did notice was the drum production on this was really fairly thick.
Oh, yeah. For sure. And well, we should probably mention too that we're now seeing around this era was Dirge Rep on Monumension? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think
is this his last record?
No, he's on Below the Lights, but he's not listed as a band member.
Oh, okay, that's right. That's what it is. And then when does the
new drummer came on Issa, I believe.
Okay, well, but the what's his face? I'm forgetting his name already. The second guitar player who joined on Bloodheim.
Oh, Kronheim.
Kronheim. Is he on Monumension that you know?
I am not sure.
Okay, because I know by the time Below the Lights, which is the next record, comes out, he's gone, and they've got a new guy by the name of Arve Isdale.
Yeah, we've got a promo of Monumension, so that has basically no information, and for some reason, it's been hard to find anything online about
it. Oh my gosh, yeah, we went online just to sort of look because we wanted to see if Peter Tatgreen and Abyss Studios still recorded this record, and I swear, like every place you look, there's nothing like nothing.
And Enslaved's website's done in Flash, and it's like choking right now or something. So I don't know what's going on.
Good luck trying to find some information about these guys, I guess. But they do have a MySpace page, I did notice. So
yeah, which has an equally little amount of information on it.
But you could become friends with these guys.
Yeah.
And speaking of personality things, a kind of funny little anecdote from a friend of ours who's actually gone over to Norway to interview these guys is he said, not only are these some of the nicest guys he's ever sort of been around, but I guess they have a secret obsession with Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm. They're just like the most hardcore Larry David fans. So if that adds a different element to your listening of the cosmic black metal here.
Probably calling something the Costanza riff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the Costanza. I'm not going to attempt a Norwegian accent.
It's like Trey Zagazoth from Morbid Angel's fascination with like anime and video games.
Old Nintendo games. Yeah. That's probably how he built his dexterity.
Yeah, you can't be totally evil all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Evil's hard work, I'd say.
Evil 20% of the time, then the rest is Star Trek and comic books.
Yes, that's true. I sort of save my evilness for classroom discipline, when I can, and sort of unleash it upon the kids. But anyways, back to Enslaved and sort of the progression that they're going through here. We're going to hear one more tune from Monumension, a tune called Vision, Sphere of the Elements, a Monument Part 2. So hopefully you got all that the first time. We'll just call it Vision for posterity's sake. And one thing that's kind of cool about this song is it has a sort of loose Mastodon type feel going on, especially with the drums are sort of like a lot of fills all the time.
Yeah, a lot of time work. A lot of it's not quite as not that Trim was straightforward or Dirge Up was straightforward, but this just seems like a lot more. The drummer's a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's still Dirge doing this.
Yeah, what am I thinking?
You thinking
ahead of record?
Yeah. And one of the other things that's sort of cool about this is you almost start to see a strange, almost stoner, like sludge rock element that sort of plays in musically. And Jeff, you mentioned Charger,
Yeah, almost a crust element as well. Just a lot of or hardcore, just really strong.
Mm-hmm. And it's
Nothingness, blue, a little bit of blues influence.
Was this the record that we kind of picked out a couple bolt thrower drum lines too?
I think it was either that or Below the Lights had some, just some really like war drums, which again,
standard Andy Whale stuff, a lot of repetitive drum or tom hits and stuff.
Exactly. And then we're going to get into the next record, which was Below the Lights, which came out in 2003. And this was their first record on the End, which, if I'm not mistaken...
It's their only record on the End.
The only record on the End.
I think the last two were on Candlelight. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, at this point, I mean, really, Osmos had come to an end pretty much by this point.
Actually, they're still putting stuff out, but they have like
kind
no
of
presence.
Irrelevant. Yeah,
they put out like Impel Nazarene and Drill Killer and like
So I think Enslaved probably fulfilled their contract and recognized that they needed a different place to find their voice. And Below the Lights even adds the progressive elements even more, I'd say. And you're going to hear that in the song that we're going to hear here called The Crossing, which has a nice kind of epic beginning. So we're going to hear Vision from Monumension, and then we're going to hear the first of a trio of songs from Below the Lights. And this is The Crossing. So enjoy. just heard The Crossing from Below the Lights, which is an album we're going to continue to explore a little bit. Thoughts on Below the Lights, gentlemen?
Not a one.
Not a one. Don't even care.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, we're all hungry. Just kidding.
For metal.
Hungry for metal. Actually, the next couple of tunes we're going to hear are both, I mean, pretty different tunes. We're going to hear The Dead Stare, which, is sort of just a kind of a standard Enslaved song at first. And then, like, sort of in the middle, they, like, have a contest of, like, how many instruments they can sort of throw in. And this, like, they can't kind of play off one riff for, like, the next 4 minutes. Yeah, it's just a giant build. It's a kind of a cool tune. And then we're going to hear Havenless, which has a kind of a cool reputation, actually.
For being on, Metal Headbanger's Journey, the documentary?
Yeah, it really played a pretty prominent role with some of the sort of Viking chants. And whenever they talked about black metal, I think that was the song they first played. And then they kind of showed a montage of Norway, So this is it's like a Carnival Cruise song from Iggy Pop.
Well, it's kind of bringing back their, because they used to do a lot of this chanting stuff earlier on, but you didn't really see it for a couple records. And
reminds me a little bit of Wizard of Oz when
oh yeah.
The Metallica
exactly. So it's kind of cool. So I mean, again, Below the Lights they're almost this is to me the furthest that they're going to expand in terms of a completely experimental record, because I feel like on Issa they have a vision, and Below the Lights sort of feels like they're really just having fun.
They're still feeling around a little bit, but Issa and Ruun both are very, very consistent.
Exactly. Whereas Below the Lights, you're going to hear from these next two songs. I mean, they're all over the place, and but again, a nice. It's a really self-contained record though. Only 7 songs, which is they're starting to. I think
they're starting to cut a little bit of the fat on some of these.
Exactly.
Not every song needs to be 8.5 minutes long.
Exactly. And they're not editing their ideas, but they're editing like sort of
more focused.
Streamlining them better.
And so you can start to sort of suss that out from these next couple tunes. And then the next set that we play, we're gonna play Dead Stare and Havenless. We're gonna close out with one of the tunes from Issa, which is sort of the next record we're kind of gonna get into, and it's a tune called Ascension. And in particular, it has a lot of really progressive elements going on, a lot of stop-start type stuff. And then this is really where they're getting heady and really atmospheric, especially at the end of that song, which will kind of bring us into our next Talkset, as you'll hear. It's like cosmic, like the sort of the cosmic singing. And I think at this point,
a weird thing they're bringing, well, not weird, but weird for them is they're bringing in like scaled leads, like they're actually based off traditional scales and like major chords and things that doesn't seem out of place, but it's gonna, a lot of you that are familiar with Opeth, you're gonna say, that sounds a little familiar.
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily sound just like Opeth, but they got a lot of the same ideas. They're kind of in the same headspace, I think.
Yeah, very similar. I'd say though, a lot of the riffs from Enslaved, though, it's almost like they have a little more discordant feel.
Yeah.
But the structure is definitely.
Yeah, and even some of the bends and things like that.
Some of the backwards, stuff. Tool does as far as just approaching a song progressions and stuff. You can feel a little bit of that in there as well, I think.
Sure. And again, I think Enslaved is, they almost have the freedom like a Tool or a Radiohead or one of these sort of, so-called mainstream kind of modern prog bands. I mean, everyone wants to throw the prog tag at Tool and Radiohead for whatever reasons. And Enslaved almost operates in that same universe, and Opeth can kind of be in there, Porcupine Tree, and they sort of do whatever they want, and people kind of still listen to them and accept what they're doing, which is it's
interesting, because a band like Opeth 10 years ago, if they would never have gotten as big as they are now. It's just something was just right at the time when they came out for people to be able to get past like incredibly guttural vocals.
Absolutely,
and glom onto it. So I don't know if that's thanks to like new metal or what, but.
Yeah, and I mean, do you see like what a band like Enslaved's doing, guys? Like, do you feel like it's they're trying to open themselves up to a new audience purposely, or do you think they might accidentally start to get accepted?
I think it's a maturity kind of
like
thing.
You have a natural progression of kind of what what they want to do, basically, as they expand into different kinds of music. Obviously, that's gonna.
But do you think they could be as like, say, cult as like some of the bands that are sort of in the same universe, like a Neurosis and Opeth and Isis, you know, bands that sort of play by their own rules and have sort of attracted a following because of that, even though they haven't really like, you know, down to their music?
I don't know if there's like a casual Enslaved. They're not a band, except for these last 2 records, that I really hear many like younger people talking about.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe,
I don't know if it's something that if you get these last records and you go back and check out what they did in the past, or I don't know. I've never really talked to anybody about Enslaved except for people in the room and a handful of other people.
Yeah, so. Exactly. And it's sort of strange. I almost feel like they could be, like they could go to that next place. Maybe they're not going to be Tool or Radiohead, obviously, but maybe we're an Opeth or a Meshuggah or some of these other bands that play with.
Yeah, the imagery might be working against them a little bit on that, because Opeth's pretty benign and the lyrics are all pretty standard. There's nothing too fantastical.
Sure, yeah. Whereas Enslaved is getting much more esoteric, and sort of spiritual and heady, which I would think would attract Tool fans. But Tool fans, how many of them are going to find out about Enslaved?
Well, you look at where Meshuggah got really big. It's when they went out on tour.
Isis,
Tool.
Toured with Tool.
And they've got the same kind of the death style vocals.
Sure,
but Enslaved are a little bit more disheartening, I guess.
This is true. Razor blades, I think, is one of the ways. It's
there's
like
a couple
razor wire vocals or
where
something.
they kind of back out of the music and he's just doing a scream, and you can hear it sounds like it's like blood curdling.
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
It's like old Paradise Lost or something.
Throat. Yeah.
And so, well, I guess Maynard, if you're out there listening to us, this is a band you should look into, in the next tour. So, anyway, so enjoy Dead Stare and Havenless from Below the Lights, and then Ascension, a aptly titled tune from Issa.
We're deg så sommer i det fjerne, men han fram og bein inn mot jordas kjerne, og til deg god seilt deg bort ifra nord, mot deg annan tid, mat og brenne ord, framfor deg ei nyhetsstrid deg så sommer i det fjerne, men han fram og bein inn mot jordas kjerne. Overwhelming, there's no life for me. I don't care if it makes me blind.
You just heard Ascension off of Issa, kind of one of the last two records from a band called Enslaved that we've been sort of listening to tonight. And, what are your feelings on the record Issa as a whole? Because it was a really different record when it came out.
It was one of those kind of records where I listened to it in the car 3-4 times and I just kind of put it away. It's one of those things that, it's one of those like typical kind of grower records where you're like, well, it sounds pretty good, but I'm not always drawn back to listen to it. But every time I do listen to it, I'm always hearing different things.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like a headphone record. You just have to. There's so many things going on. It takes a while to absorb them all and to kind of appreciate them.
And I think it stands. I think you almost have to listen to the whole record in one sitting. It's not just like here's the single off this record or something.
Yeah.
Sure. And there's even intros and outros. It's like there's bookends to it.
Yeah, like one song,
thematic.
the way it ends leads totally into the beginning of another one. It's kind of hard to cut them up. So
Sure. And you see that a lot with Ruun as well. And it's interesting. I'm just sort of staring at these two covers, and I mean they almost have sort of a theme going for them. This sort of very stark,
monochromatic. Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at the cover of Issa, it's like a shape of an eye of some sort with some sort of like, I don't know, metaphysical Hindu third eye looking ball with some.
We'll let you explain this one.
Some what appears to maybe Shiva be a topless, goddess of some sort on it.
I thought it was a dude, but
I can't tell. It could be just a dude with
guy that drinks a lot of soy milk.
Some pectoral muscles of some sort. You really can't tell because whatever it is reaching up to the sky again. It's a very heady record is what we're talking about here. And this is the first record they did for Candlelight Records, as we said before. They did one for The End and previously on Osmos. But, you got song titles like Lunar Force, Ascension, Neogenesis, which we'll hear in a moment.
Everything's kind of headed more astral, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. They've definitely entered a sort of a spiritual cosmic realm by this point. There's even
could be borderline new agey. I don't know.
Yeah, and in Grindcore,
not in a John Tesh way.
Grindcore here is actually a closet Yanni fan. From back in the days.
Darn right.
Remember when your grandpa got you that
Live at
amazing Live at the Acropolis T-shirt?
I have it to this day.
That's a keeper. That's probably eBay worthy, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So
one guy that can sport a mustache better than most.
Yeah, that's true. Him and Tom Selleck or Burt Reynolds, they're pretty much the only. What's the old saying go? If you have a mustache and you're not Burt Reynolds and Tom Selleck,
put it away.
Yeah, put it away.
If you're under 40. Yeah.
So, but anyways, Issa's a kind of a different sort of record, and you'll see the same sort of thing, I think, on this record that you'll hear on Ruun. And we're gonna listen to kind of what I would say the touchstone song of the record. It's 12 minutes long. I mean, it's really sort of an attempt at getting back to the epic kind of songwriting that they've really specialized in throughout their career. But this is again throwing these new elements in that you've sort of been talking about, some of the progressive elements and some of the different types of drumming, some of the chant vocals. I mean, it's a really sort of everything but the kitchen sink kind of song, which is I think why it's really representative of this whole record.
And still they still keep some of those basic elements like the discordant stabs and with the guitar and just like distorted sweep picking type things like that have always kind of been a signature of their sound. That's I think the coolest thing about Enslaved is they're just able to just move within the this style they have. And,
they've almost kind of like set up like confinements, but they're really able to bounce around a lot. It's not like Metallica black record, like, oh, it doesn't sound like Metallica anymore. They always sound like Enslaved,
sure,
no matter how progressive they get.
Sure. And by this point too, it should be noted that they've now added a new drummer. Dirge Rep's left, and we have a guy named Cato Betvold. I think it's hard to read the.
Where was he from? Do you remember?
I do not remember.
He's from Red Harvest.
Red Harvest, yeah,
which is kind of like a industrial-ish black metal.
Yeah,
band,
kind of industrial black metal, some progressive elements too. And now they've also brought in sort of a full-time keyboard player by the name of Herbrand Larson. So they're a 5-piece now, which would kind of go with their sound. Their sound kind of gets bigger. They they can't be a 3-piece like they were on their first record.
But it's basically been the two. It's been Ivar and Gritla the whole time. So that's kind of been the core.
Absolutely, and I think they do the lion's share of the songwriting for sure. And then the other thing to note, which is cool, and is that we've got a lot of guest vocalists on this record, which I don't know if you guys were aware that Api-vat and Nocturnal Culto were both on this record. You know, it's almost like
I couldn't really pick out where.
Yeah, they're not in any of the songs we're listening to. They're actually in Lunar Force and Bounded by Allegiance. So.
Bounded by Allegiance.
Yeah, there you go. So if you hear some Popeye, if you buy this record and hear some Popeye,
yeah, because usually when you hear like Api-vat was on the last couple Demo Burger records, and when he pops in, it's like, oh, there's Api-vat.
Yeah, so we'll have to go back and check out that song. I just noticed that, so it's kind of cool. So we're going to hear this sort of epic tune, Neogenesis, and then we're going to sort of fade into a tune from Ruun, which is a record we'll sort of spend our last talk set talking about, and the name of that song is Essence.
Navigation by the fires of death towards the shores of Neogenesis. Navigation by the fires of death.
You just heard Essence from the last record that Enslaved put out called Ruun, which was put out in 2006. But I think near the end of 2006, because I remember listening to a lot last year too. So, and this record for you guys was a little bit more difficult to get into, right? On some level?
It didn't seem like it grabbed me right away. Kind of like the last one did. I mean, they're both kind of grower records. It's not. It just doesn't seem like one I'd put on all the time.
Sure. And you even notice a lot of this record in particular has a lot of Tool elements in terms of the type of kind of, was it backwards sort of riffing
inverted chords, or I don't know exactly what they are, but they're discordant.
Dissonance and just.
And it's almost I don't want to, dare I say, more of kind of a conservative record, but it's like it's very, very focused. They're not sort of going too wild and crazy on any one particular song. It's almost like they're beyond that in a way. Like they really want to get a different kind of message across to the audience. And Ruun, of course, has to do with sort of the Viking religion, sort of the reading of runes and that sort of thing, and predicting the future and sort of like reading the cosmic universe. And I mean, there's even a song on this record called "Heir to the Cosmic Seed." I mean, they're definitely have gravitated to prog territory, on a lot of levels.
Building a space shuttle in the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. They're definitely sitting in the sweat lodge.
Starship Earth.
Yes.
It's starting to sound like Sun Ra lyrics.
Yeah, no doubt. So, but
Planet Earth.
This record in particular is sort of near and dear to me, and those of you who have sort of enjoyed Enslaved over the last couple shows, hopefully, if this record sort of seems tame in comparison, it is on some level, but I think it's heavy in other ways. I think it's heavy in terms of the lyrical message and some of the sort of, especially the song we're going to open up with here, Ruun, where some of the transitions are almost like have great emotional feeling behind them, and they're almost replacing sort of loudness and blast beats with sort of high levels of extreme emotion. It's still an extreme metal record in many ways, but it's just a altogether different type of metal record. And this song that we'll open up with is the title track. For me, is my favorite Enslaved song. And Terrorizer, I remember reading something where they said something along the lines that this is sort of the peak of Enslaved songwriting in terms of just, they don't have to be so, what you heard on Below the Lights, for instance, was when they made a musical transition, like you felt it, you knew it was
sometimes
happening.
It's arbitrary. Yeah, it's just like, okay, we'll do the, like this little noodle thing to get you into this, but all this other stuff seems like it's all planned out from the get-go where it's
very
going to go.
Smooth. Everything sort of has this really cosmic flow, if you will.
Not blast beat to then acoustic guitar, then back into screaming or something.
Yeah, where it's a little clunky, in the old stuff.
Transition, for sure.
And I think you can tell from the pair of songs that we're going to throw out here. And again, you hear more of the sort of Opeth elements, which I don't think is intentional. I just think, again,
it's not the Opeth's probably the most relatable band. If people listen to the podcast, that would know. But it's traditional prog. I mean, a lot of ways sounds like Porcupine Tree and a lot of,
or even some of the '70s stuff that I'm sure like guys like Ivar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
we're listening to a lot
Camel
of stuff.
and a lot of that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
A lot of more structured type riffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it's
if
it's the other guitar player that's doing a lot of the leads. But
I think it is.
You can totally tell the two different guys playing the leads.
So, because that's one thing I noticed was it seemed like Ivar's guitar was on almost like a lo-fi.
Like they got two different amp setups or something. Yeah,
they have more of a lead type.
A little bit of chorus effect or flanger or something on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense to sort of get those sort of two diametrically opposed elements kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to have two guitar personalities where you don't have to write down, okay, Michael Mott did this one and Chris Mott did this one kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of a also brings a real texture, layered type texture to the sound.
Yeah, I mean these songs and this record in particular, dare I say, sort of has pretty elements to it. It's Again, they've reached sort of a new level of songwriting. It's going to be interesting to see where they kind of go from here.
It's kind of the thing. I know, a mutual friend of all of ours, Mike Johnston, who who's in a jazz group, who said it's really difficult to try to do something beautiful and put it out there because you're scared of being slapped down. But you hit a certain point and you're just it seems like Enslaved's at that point where they're whatever their messages they want to get across, they're going to put it out there. If it's really extreme and guttural, whatever, or if it's a beautiful song, they're going to do that, and it feels more honest. It doesn't feel like
absolutely.
I don't know. I can't even think of an example of somebody that tries to do pretty like pop music a lot of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Where it's like bubblegum pop pretty, but some of this stuff can be honestly beautiful. to listen
Sure,
to.
and it's sort of like, like a Jeff Buckley, for instance, or Catatonia, like, or Anathema even. Anathema is sort of comparable in a way to the sort of headiness that Enslaved is doing, but they're still writing these sort of like deeply personal, heavy songs in that way. Those sort of particular artists, but they don't always have to be loud. Or don't and I'm not talking like this isn't Enslaved Unplugged by any means. Don't be sort of scared of that. There's still definitely a metal band doing metallic things, but I think they're just going for a totally different type of mature sort of songwriting, and I think you can.
They feel really comfortable in their own skin now. I think so. They've kind of set up this for what people to expect of them, and push that a little bit. But it seems like they're really in a comfortable place these last two records.
Absolutely, and that's going to be kind of interesting to see where they go. But
yeah, for sure.
As long as it's not reload and load.
Yeah, I hope not. So
everybody's gonna cut their hair and start wearing eyeliner.
Yeah, we're gonna hear it's sort of close up as I try and take things back from that comment. Yeah, I almost don't know where to go with that. We're gonna hear the title track "Ruun" and then another tune called "Api-vat," which, by all means, I have no idea what that is.
It's like caveat.
Api-vat.
I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. We'll go with that. Thanks, Mark.
Cul-de-sac.
Enjoy. That was Api-vat and Ruun, the last two songs of our epic two-part Enslaved.
Our first two-parter, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of bold. It's like when a sitcom goes on a limb and has a to be continued.
When a sitcom goes to Hawaii, you know,
Yeah.
we hit a certain mark, you know.
Exactly. You don't, hopefully we're not jumping the shark in terms of as the podcast world goes. But hopefully you've really gotten a sense of the breadth of sort of Enslaved's career, and you could see why we probably needed 2 episodes to do this, because
With the length of the songs, we've got a lot of pushing 10 plus minute songs, plus just how diverse their career is.
Yeah.
And how many records they really have out. It's kind of crazy to go back and look at it.
Oh, I know.
Sure.
Spans a huge section of metal.
And they're one of those bands where you could play 3, you could pick 3 songs off of any record, and all 3 of those songs are going to maybe be completely different.
Yeah.
There's very few bands that can kind of pull that off, where you're actually getting completely different flavors almost from 3 different sort of separate songs. And so, at least until these last couple records, like Issa and Ruun, where they're sort of starting to get a more commonality and focus and thematic.
But even if you play, Viking Ligerveldi and then play Ruun, it's fairly seamless. I mean, you're not like, oh, what band's this?
Sure.
You can totally tell it's the same band.
But to me, when you hear that opening keyboard of Lefande, that opened our whole first show up, I mean, that has the same sort of powerful feel that like a song like Ruun has for me, where it's like it's pulling you to another world. Yeah,
you just got 12 years, 13 years of musical maturity behind you, so see what you can do. But
absolutely. Well, thanks, Jeff. We really appreciate having you along these last couple podcasts
problem.
in the Requiem Studios here in lovely Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah, which this is a pretty advanced studio. I'm not gonna lie. You should see the output that we have going on here.
Robot just gave me a glass of water.
Well, we went from an end table microphone and 2 chairs to 3 chairs and a dining room table and a laptop now. So we're big time.
Yeah, we finally hit the big top. So, well, we hope to hear some thoughts maybe that you have, and we really look forward to some emails at requiempodcast at gmail.com. Yes,
requiem@gmail.com. And thank you to all the people that have sent emails, and I haven't necessarily got around to sending responses quite as quickly as I'd like to. I was without internet for pushing 2 weeks when I moved. So
Mark, that's a code for slacker, I think. No, actually, he did. We can attest that he did have to move into the new Requiem Podcast Studios, so he had to relocate his life.
Located on the lovely Huron River.
Yeah, this is true. So, thank you, Jeff.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Until next time, I think we'll be bringing you a little kind of a band that starts the origins of it all to some degree.
Yeah, at least
from
in
lovely
Europe.
Flint, Michigan.
Yeah,
we're going to be talking about Repulsion next time. So, till then, I'm Mark Rudolph.
And I'm Jason Hundy.